Pardon me.
I'm here to refute Samantha's claim on her major claim on how government-financed birth control will benefit women in society. Her second claims are number 1, free birth control will reduce the number of unplanned teen pregnancies, and number 2, free birth control will lower abortion rates. In response to her main claim, I believe that birth control encourages sexual tendencies, and if used poorly can result in unwanted pregnancy. In response to her first claim, although I do acknowledge her claim and agree to it that free birth control will help reduce pregnancy, and I do not agree with the reasoning though. She claims that if birth control were to be free, that would lower the number of unplanned teen pregnancies. However, what good would that do if teens did not have the knowledge to use these contraceptives effectively? In this analogy, you may have the best supercomputer, but what the hell will it do if you don't know how to use it? In the article, Policy Solutions for Preventing Unplanned Pregnancies, also one of the same sources she used in the speech, Adam Thomas talks about a second factor that contributes to unintended pregnancies is that individuals who are serious about wanting to prevent pregnancy but do not have the necessary information to use birth control methods effectively. Instead of free birth control, how about offering free classes that offer the information needed to use these birth controls in the best possible way? In her speech, she also talks about how teen pregnancy has hit an all-time low, and that we should continue to decrease the rate by taking appropriate measures. The only other measure I can really think of is not having sex at all, and if so, what would be the point of having birth control in the first place then? To her second claim, she claims that, although I do acknowledge this claim, I do not agree with it whatsoever, because she claims that if birth control becomes more available to women, that it would reduce the number of abortions. But rather than reduce, I believe that it would increase abortions. Thomas Peters, an American Baptist blogger, seen and heard on many news stations such as CNN and Fox News, writes, "What if people engage in sexual activity without thinking of the consequences because of their safety net? They will continue the cycle until unwanted pregnancy does occur, and the next step is eventually abortion." So even if you had all this birth control, all this free birth control, all you're really doing is just removing the consequences from the actions and from the thought of teenagers and other birth control users. And throughout the whole speech, she speaks as if birth control works almost every single time. Even if they did work 99 out of 100% of the time, which is not even close or even likely, the use of a contraceptive only takes into account one case of sexual activity, not a lifetime of sexual activity. With the consequences gone, people will engage in sexual activity, will continue to engage in these activities until birth control fails, and then they realize that the only option they have left is the 100% version of birth control, which is abortion. In conclusion, if people do not have the knowledge to use birth control and to continue to engage in sexual activity with no regard to the inevitable consequences, all we'll be left with is the abortion of many unwanted pregnancies. This is why I believe birth control only encourages sexual behavior, and poor use will only result in unwanted pregnancy.
All right, well, you label the advocate's claims pretty clearly. I understand the general position that you're taking, although you seem to be accepting the premise on each of these points. You're trying to diminish it to some degree and suggest that there would be either alternatives, and some of those alternatives have negative consequences. And we're almost on the same kind of argument that we had in the last presentation concerning whether or not abortion becomes an appropriate and legitimate alternative. And I can see that that would be a potential disadvantage argument and a policy argument on this. There there is a claim that says that on the first point that it doesn't do you much good if you don't know how to use it. The analogy to the computer is fine. What would be helpful here is if you had a little bit more information that suggested that people don't know how to use it, particularly teens. That seems to be where the focus is here. There's a kind of a general statement at it, but there's, it's not very clear what are the conditions under which teens are having sex? Is there the kind of planning that goes on that would allow the use of birth control? The circumstances under which people would find it to be acceptable. There might be family issues that would prevent it from working anyway. So I think that there's a whole series of issues that could be developed on that with some information, and you don't quite get that far. The argument about teen pregnancy being low, in essence, I think you've got an idea here. The advocate said this as well. This is a position that they've taken. So why is it that we suddenly need to provide birth control if the teen pregnancy rate is the lowest it's ever been? It sounds to me like they're thinking that somehow we're going to get to 100% outcome. And then that's when I think your second argument comes into play, that there's this argument that says that we can't really guarantee that. I don't know what you figure the failure rate or the lack of success rate is on any birth control. Let's say it's 1 out of 100, and you've got 10 million teens having sex at any given time, and they're using birth control. Well, you can figure out what the number of potential pregnancies would be doing that. I'm not going to do the math in my head because I promise not to do math in front of people again in my head, because I'm going to screw it up. But you guys can get out your calculator and figure out those kinds of things. And then the question that becomes, how substantially different would it be if people used it every single time? The question, though, is, will they use it every single time? And that seems to be the assumption of the advocate's argument, and I think that you've got a good press on that. You need a little bit more information on some of these points. Sometimes it sounds like you're kind of going in a circular position, and that may be because the argument was originally a little bit circular in nature. But the presses that you made were okay. They were reasonable. All right. Thank you.